Hi, I'm Jim McCann, founder of 1-800-Flowers. I'm not satisfied when I learn something new unless I share it forward. And so we created this podcast to continue that, to share forward the wonderful people we get to meet and most importantly get to learn from and make our lives richer and better. Together we'll cover the human experience. And for me, the human experience is foundational in the idea of relationships. The topics will be far-reaching, but common element you'll see here is it's all about relationships. So I invite you to join us on this journey. Come experience it with us, share your thoughts and ideas, and become part of our community. We'd love to have you.
Vicky Ward knows when there's more to the story, as she has built a career covering high-profile events and individuals, always going the extra mile to find the underlying motivations. Vicky is the New York Times best-selling author of Kushner, Inc., Greed, Ambition, Corruption, the extraordinary story of Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. She's also the host of the popular podcast series Chasing Ghislaine, which focuses on Ghislaine Maxwell as an accomplished Jeffrey Epstein. Vicky Ward got her start in the UK press before moving to America to strike out on her own. She has a special talent for finding the deeper motives behind an individual's actions and has written for the Huffington Post, Esquire, Vanity Fair, and Town and Country. She is also the author of two other best-selling books, The Liar's Ball, The Extraordinary Saga of How One Building Broke the World's Toughest Tycoons, and The Devil's Casino, Friendship, Betrayal, and the High-Stake Games Played Inside Lehman Brothers. Vicky also writes the Substack newsletter, Vicky Ward Investigates. In this episode, Vicky discusses her recent works, Chasing Ghislaine and Kushner, Inc., and her methodology that allows her to go deeper than other journalists and uncover the stories beneath the surface.
Let's talk a little bit, Vicky, about the career side of things. The world of journalism, you mentioned how different it was in the UK than when you came here to the US, how you had to change your perspective on your career and the things that you did. You've had some unbelievably exciting adventures. You're curious, that's as obvious as can be. So, and the fact that you said early in our conversation today that everybody has a story, even if they don't know it, and that you'll always look for those and probe those and pull those out. But the world of journalism has changed dramatically since that story appeared on 8 pages of the New York Post of the merger of AOL and Time Warner. The idea was very sound. Its timing and its execution, certainly questioned. But the idea that traditional media worlds and digital worlds were going to merge has obviously been proven to be the case. And that's had consequences on how you approach your career. We had a conversation another time where you told me, here you are, you're head of a family, the provider for the family, and you worked 6 months like a dog, day and night, on a story that you found intriguing, and indeed the world found intriguing. And you worked hard on that for all of those 6 months with nothing else going on. And you got paid an enormous sum by a magazine for that in a couple of $20,000 or $25,000. And you said, oh my goodness, this economics doesn't work for me anymore. So you explained how you start to have to think differently as a gig economy worker, as a journalist, a freelance journalist. That is, you have relationships, but no single payer anymore, no single employer, as most top journalists don't. But you have an idea for a story, and then you have to think about, if I spend that much time on the story that I think my public would be interested in, I now have to think about, how do I monetize that? Is there a magazine story there? Is there a book there? Is there a audio series, and you have a multi-year deal with audible.com? Is there a documentary? Is there potentially a feature film? Is there a book? How will this play on my Substack platform? So you now have to not only be this ferocious, tenacious, fearless journalist, you also have to be Vicky Ward, the business manager, the time manager, the entrepreneur.
100%. And I think, as you, in fact, I was reading, I think Dylan Byers talking about the New York Times and the journalists who have been leaving there to do what I do for economic reasons. I mean, I'm very lucky. I am a known quantity, and I think it would be harder for someone young and unknown
Got a brand.
to do. Yes. So I have a brand. I have my Substack, Vicky Ward Investigates, and that becomes the intellectual property that I own. And then I decide which of those newsletters, as you say, should be as worth a conversation with Audible and they think would be worth a podcast series, which of those might be suitable for a documentary, and it's possible they might work for both. And then which of those would, as you say, would be worth a book or a magazine article. And, I am thinking about time and money. Time is money. You're a very successful businessman. You know this. And I think that a lot of journalists for a long time, before we came into this, the dot-com world, they had these well-paid jobs that they could sit there and do for life and really not think about money. That is just not the case anymore.
You'd be reasonably compensated. You weren't going to get rich, but you're doing something you like, and you never had to worry about the paycheck and what the balance in the account was. So you wouldn't get rich, but you would
you could survive.
But that's gone now, right?
That has gone. The opportunity for much better economics is there in a way it has never been before, particularly because audiences have changed. They now follow
have choice.
They follow people. They don't follow these platforms.
So the power is shifting from the platform to the individual journalist. But it seems to me you have two decisions as this new journalist business person that you are. That is the kernel, the story, the idea that gets you excited, and you think, boy, there's something there, and you start poking at it. So now you're deciding how much time I spend on that, and at the same time you're doing the calculus in the background of if it develops like I think it will into this idea, this story, how do I think about monetizing that in the most effective way?
Exactly.
And do you therefore say, great idea, but at this point in time, I have to allocate my personal resources, my energy, my time, my talent? That seems to be the toughest decision.
So here's where the fearlessness bit comes in. You know very quickly whether or not something has got legs, whether there is more
commercial viability, that is depth of story, that is character development,
and
intrigue.
Exactly. You know very quickly that when the stories that may have been out there about this, whatever topic it is, have just scratched the surface, that there is a much bigger story that has many more layers underneath that. The real question is, can you get it? If I think an idea is great, and I'm pretty convinced that there's a lot out there that has not yet been uncovered, I have never worried who else is doing it. Will I not get there? I've just gone for it.
I suspect Chasing Ghislaine was one of those, because everybody had written about it. And as my wife would quickly tell you, I read James Patterson's book some years ago called Filthy Rich about Jeffrey Epstein. And so when the Epstein story broke, my wife was saying, how do you know so much about this? Have you ever met him? I said, no, I've never met him, but I'm intrigued by this story, having read James Patterson's work, where frankly he hired a couple of really terrific journalists to help him flesh out that story. But I was always reading all those stories as the story unfolded in the media. And I said, no one is really telling the thing that I'm most interested in, is the money. How did he actually get the money? What did he do? How did it, all of a sudden he has a $60 million brownstone just a couple of blocks from my first flower shop. How did this happen? And then when you did your series, your book, and which became the Audible series, Chasing Ghislaine, I said, this is it. But you had to be in the midst of that, dealing with exactly what you just talked about, which was so many people were writing about it, but you knew you were going to the essence of the story that would appeal to crazy people like me who really wanted to know the details on what happened.
Well, I also knew I was in an advantage there because I knew that I'd kept all these notes
From
from
18
years
years
and
ago.
years. Yes, and that gave me a huge head start in knowing who to call
You
and
knew the
where to
characters too. You knew the
go. Yes.
personality.
I wasn't that worried about thinking that I could tell a different story on that one. Believe it or not, on the Kushner book, the White House is something that, there are hundreds of reporters covering every day. That's their beat.
And hundreds of reporters who think they're at the top of their game. I mean, they got to it. And here
Right.
you come around the outside saying there's another story here. You had Michael Wolff write his insider's recount.
Yeah.
You say, I'm coming from a different approach. And you started in New Jersey with Grandpa Kushner and how he built this empire, and then what Charles Kushner did, and how the insights you gave into the family, the dynamic, the motivations, the impact of religion. It was just really a deep dive, but you went around the outside of the White House and in the back door.
Yes. And I also think, Jim, that what I thought I had that I didn't think the other beat journalists had that would prove really helpful. My book prior to that one was about the world of New York real estate. It was about the history of the General Motors building.
Also terrific work. Again, the intersection of characters, wild personalities, criminal activity, money, fame, the center of New York. I mean, it was, the Liar's Ball was just terrific work. You get at it.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I mean, but because of that knowledge that I had of finance and real estate, as you know, my first book was about Lehman Brothers. I sort of knew that a way to look at, I had a perspective on this family in the White House that the Washington reporters, for the most part, were not looking at it. They were not looking, they didn't have the contacts that I had in the world of New York real estate, who were all busy.
Which would include a man who went on to be president.
Yes, but all the people around Trump, the businessman, remained around him in this White House, and all the people around the Kushners remained, around the Kushner business. Everybody's feeding at this trough, and that was why I knew that I could tell a story that would be different. But it was scary. You always need. You need to find a way in. You often, in business stories, in fact, in a lot of stories, most journalists know this, we go to the lawyers, because the lawyers are people who often feel very underappreciated. They feel they've done all the work. Sometimes it was the lawyers who came up with the brilliant idea, even for the transaction, and yet
no money down to buy the GM building, maybe.
Right, but they're not the ones who get the glory or the fame.
Yep.
They're not the ones who get the really big payout. And
they're papering the transaction.
Right. Yes. If this is something worth writing about, they also think that maybe they can help their client by controlling the narrative a little bit. So you, as a journalist, you always want to make the lawyers your best friends. Now, what that says about the legal profession, I don't know.
Now, when you're writing the Kushner book, do they know you're writing the book while it's in process?
100%, because I do view myself as non-partisan. I am a registered independent, and I actually really believe that journalists who do the kind of work that I do, very, very investigative, really need to have clean hands.
Yes.
And I really want to hear everybody's point of view.
Did you want to speak directly with Jared and Ivanka? And
absolutely. No. I mean, I have known Jared and Ivanka.
And that's what I was suspecting from being around New York. You have personal relationships. I don't know. I don't know that you've spoken to the president, the former
I
president.
have.
But during this process, because I know he's sort of dismissed you in the press.
Well, then he also had a long conversation with me during the transition. It was actually a very nice conversation.
Funny how he didn't remember you then just a couple of years later.
Well, the thing about Donald Trump, as we know, is that in the same way, he has a love-hate relationship with Maggie Haberman of the New York Times.
And I was thinking of that while you were saying that, because
Yes.
what we've all read in the last couple of weeks, that he barely knows her, but according to others, he was the main source.
Right. So the thing about this president, and he makes no secret of this, is that if you're a journalist who is relevant, he wants to engage.
He'll have time for you.
Yes, because the one thing he will never ignore is a platform. And, the reason he spoke to me in the transition, he'd watched me on television. So I've been watching you. And, it's sort of like a moth to a flame. That's just who he is. So it doesn't really almost matter whether he's saying nice things or bad things. The point is he's saying the things. And in fact, I did reach out to him after he left the White House. I didn't speak to him, but I did get an answer to the question I was asking.
When you did the book on Kushner, Chasing Ghislaine, you unearthed a raging battle between two legal titans. Mm-hmm. And have you kept up with that evolution of the story?
Yes. I saw David Boies 2 nights ago. Boies Schiller, the law firm he founded, had its 25th anniversary party. And so it was very interesting to see him and this firm that he's built and that has been under controversy recently, because a lot of people have left. I am absolutely keeping tabs on it. I think I know both men, David and Alan Dershowitz, really quite well, known them for a while.
And you have both respect and fondness for each of them. So it's interesting to see how this is playing out.
Yes. I mean, the thing that will happen first that's very much tied into the battle is Virginia Roberts, now world famous, probably Virginia Roberts, for being...
And you had a hand in that.
The irony of Virginia Roberts, who I have obviously since met, was that back in 2002, when I very first met Jeffrey Epstein and I was really dealing with him and his stupid threats, it was the fall of 2002, which is the exact time that Virginia, unbeknownst to me, ran to Thailand and got away from him. If only I had known that at the time, I would have been able to include it in my article, and history might look very different. But obviously, as we know, she eventually came forward and has been critical, and she's got, she plays a critical role in this battle between these two legal titans. Yes.
When you published that book and did that work, we were left on the cliff's edge, wondering what will happen with someone who you were friendly with in the UK and maintained a casual relationship with over the years here in New York, in Ghislaine Maxwell herself. What do you make of what's happened since?
I shouldn't be shocked that she didn't pay her lawyers, and yet I am shocked she didn't pay. I mean, I know. I think what you may be referring to. She's been moved to some Club Med of a prison in Florida, right?
But she's still in prison, and for a long time.
Yes. No, I'm not shocked about that. I still think that the men in this story, and there are a lot of them, who were just as culpable, but what they did do was create this sort of socioeconomic pyramid to enable Jeffrey Epstein, and they absolutely, I think, knew what they were enabling. And that seems to me to be really wrong. Ghislaine Maxwell clearly did some terrible things, but it's almost like she's paid a price for everybody else who's vanished. And that does seem to me to be, honestly, a failing of our legal system.
But it's also what you predicted.
Yes.
Because you covered this world and what powerful men and money and fame and those intersections look like. It's the recurring theme of everything you prod at every scab you try and pick off, is to expose the underbelly of those intersections.
Yeah.
So that leads us to, what are you working on now?
Gosh, well, I'm working on several things at once, as always.
Not surprised.
I'm in the middle of, so my Substack is actually, we're going to start amping
and
that
it's called
up.
Vicky Ward Investigates on Substack, and people could and should subscribe to that.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Yes, I'm going to start amping that up, because I'm going to, people have had the option to go free. I'm soon going to make it. People really have to pay for the best stuff. I have been, to my astonishment, I've been covering the trial of Tom Barrack, very, a billionaire, friend of Donald Trump's, but who's been accused extraordinarily, actually, of not just not registering as a foreign agent, but actually spying for the United Arab Emirates. And last week, the former Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, testified on behalf of the government. And it was a very puzzling testimony, because Rex Tillerson could barely remember Tom Barrack and had no knowledge of any of this. So you were left wondering, well, what was the point of that? And the government is due to wrap up, I think, by Monday. My understanding is the defense is going to put on a hell of a defense. I'm amazed that no other journalists are giving it airtime.
I'm amazed that I'm not following this either, because it's your beat. It's power, it's money, it's politics, it's intrigue, it's all of the above.
Well, and it's the Middle East, which is obviously what Jared Kushner was all about, his foreign policy. I have been writing and following that in depth, and there is more to come. At the same time, I am making for Audible, and we've wrapped up the reporting. This is really exciting.
I love that you do it in your own voice.
Well, we're making a series about the Federalist Society, and many people may ask, what is the Federalist Society? The Federalist Society explains how power in this country really works. It explains why this current Supreme Court is made up of 6 conservatives, 5 of whom are members of the Federalist Society, and 4 of whom went to Yale Law School. So what we have done in this podcast series, which will be out next spring, is really tell the story about a pipeline of power that starts at Yale Law School. Because the Federalist Society was formed 40 years ago by 3 Yaleys at Yale Law School. And we've interviewed those people.
How many presidents have gone to Yale?
That is, but you know what? One of the professors at Yale gave me the statistics of the people who go into incredibly high office from this tiny, tiny law school is extraordinary, so disproportionate.
There were a couple named Clinton.
That is
named
Bush.
Bush.
Yes, exactly. There you see, with that on the top of your hat. But what we've done is take 4 current Yale law students, 2 members of the Federalist Society, 2 not. And we've told the story of how isolated they feel. They're aware of how this pipeline of power works. They're in it. And sort of what they feel about it and what they feel about the process of being at Yale Law School. And so in a way, we let them be the narrators and humanize what would otherwise be quite a wonky subject. And then we take it back in time to the 3 Yale law students who would be in their shoes, but 40 years ago. And the interesting thing, Jim, I've tried to balance both sides of the argument.
I see it here. certainly the Federalist. I see movie, I see documentary, certainly a big best-selling book, which you just seem to crank out with great ease. And I know it's not easy at all, but I just marvel at you and your professional career and how you go after these things. and yes, it's of interest to you, and how it's your life's work in terms of contacts at all sorts of bubble up at this. I think we're going to, I hope we get to enjoy more time where we get to discuss the things you're interested in, because now we can sit back and watch this evolve through your eyes, reading you on Substack and other publications that you print in, because now we can follow you as you follow the story. And I think the days of, okay, I'll do all the work and then bang, it happens. It seems like in the Kushner story and the evolution of the MBS-Jared relationship that you focused on there, the Epstein story, Ghislaine, where there's more to be told of that story. I think as fans, readers, and consumers of your work product, we get to take that journey with you, and it'll have different plateaus where a documentary will come out, your book, or the follow-on. The world has changed, and we get to walk with you. And boy, you have some big shoes for us to follow in.
Oh, Jim, that's so nice of you.
But I just get a kick out of your world and how you go at it. There's so many things I'd like to drill down on when we get a chance to chat again. I think earlier on when we were talking about your group of friends, the coven, as you call them, I think that's so important for all of us. We talk about and write about all the time relationships, how important they are to us in our lives. And at the end of the day, we know that no matter what successes we have in terms of our day job or what successes we have in terms of any of our pursuits, at the end of the day, we measure ourselves and we can detect and determine our degree of success and happiness based on the depth and breadth of relationships we have. And I think so many of us can learn lessons from you about being deliberate, about maintaining that network and having those wonderful relationships, because it gives you the chance to overcome fear, and it gives you the chance to be bold and to be the journalist that you are. And I frankly don't think the term journalist is a big enough and broad enough term to describe you and what you do.
Oh, well, I very much appreciate it, Jim. And I'm not going to disagree with any of that. I think that at the end of the day, all of us, I mean, you're this very successful businessman, but it only matters in the context of more important things, which are fundamentally the relationships, the people you love and love you and have your back and you have theirs. I mean, that's what comes first.
So we started out to learn about your career in journalism, and lo and behold, we learned about a wonderful person and the importance for her and for all of us in terms of the value of the relationships we have. Thanks, Vicky, for being generous with your time and sharing so much. We look forward to having this conversation often.
Absolutely, Jim. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and I know I'll be sharing it forward. I hope you get to as well. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow me along on Twitter at Jim1800Flowers and on LinkedIn at Jim McCann. Hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Celebrations Chatter. You can join our community by reaching out at chatter@celebrations.com. And while you're at it, tell us what topics you'd like us to explore here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. Thank you for listening. And don't forget to share it forward.